I am an old man living in New York City. When I look back at my life, I don't see a series of grand successes or effortless victories. I see battle after battle, moment after moment where I could have quit, but I didn't. I stayed, I fought, and somehow I survived. I was barely 20 years old when I arrived here. I remember the day I stepped off the Greyhound bus carrying nothing but an old backpack and $36 in my pocket. No friends, no family, no promises, just me and a city that didn't care if I existed. The first thing that hit me was the noise. Horns blaring, people shouting, buses groaning as they pulled away from curbs. I remember standing still at the station for a few minutes, completely overwhelmed, wondering if I had made a mistake. I didn't have a plan. I knew I needed work, a place to sleep, food to eat, the basics. I walked for hours, my sneakers worn and my stomach hollow. I asked at restaurants, stores, gas stations, anywhere with a "help wanted" sign. Most didn't even bother to answer. Some laughed. Others just shook their heads. By nightfall, I realized I had no place to go. I found a small bench near the entrance of an old subway station and sat down, too exhausted to move. That night, I learned a hard truth. New York was not a city that handed out second chances. You earned your place here, or you were forgotten. I woke up shivering. It was mid-November, and the cold cut through my jacket like a knife. My stomach ached from hunger. I decided I would go back home, wherever home was now. But when I stood up and looked around, something inside me hardened. Number. If I leave now, I'll never come back. I'll never be more than a quitter. So I kept walking. I found a rundown diner called Eddie's Place on the corner of 43rd Street. The windows were greasy and the paint was peeling, but inside it was warm and smelled like coffee and fried bacon. I pushed open the door and went straight to the counter. The man behind it was in his 50s, heavy set with thick glasses sliding down his nose. He looked up from a newspaper and said, "What do you want, kid?" "A job," I said. "Anything. I'll wash dishes, sweep floors. I'll do whatever you need." He stared at me for a long second. Then he said, "You got ID?" I shook my head. "Experience?" Again, I shook my head. He sighed. "Tell you what, wash dishes for 1 week. If you screw up, you're gone. I pay cash. No paperwork." I nodded so fast my head hurt. I spent the next 12 hours scrubbing greasy plates, scraping burnt eggs off pans, and mopping floors that smelled like old milk. My hands blistered, my back ached. But that night, when he handed me $40 in crumpled bills, it felt like I'd won the lottery. I used half of it to rent a mattress in a shared room on 125th Street. It was a miserable little place. Mold on the walls, broken windows taped shut with plastic, rats scratching in the corners. But it was mine. It was shelter. Days turned into weeks. Every morning I got up before dawn, walked to the diner, and worked until my arms and legs gave out. Some days Eddie yelled at me for being too slow. Other days he just grunted in approval. I didn't care. I needed this. During my breaks, I sat in the back alley, eating scraps of leftover food, and reading anything I could get my hands on. I found an old public library a few blocks away, and on my days off, I would sit there for hours reading about business, finance, marketing, anything that might one day help me escape washing dishes for the rest of my life. One evening, when I was cleaning tables near closing time, an old man walked in. He wasn't a customer. He owned the dusty bookstore 2 doors down. His name was Harold Finch. He watched me work for a while, then said, "Hard worker like you shouldn't waste your life wiping tables. You read?" I nodded. He smiled. "Good. You come see me tomorrow. I have something for you." The next day, after my shift, I went to his bookstore. It was cramped and smelled like old paper, but it felt warm and alive. Harold handed me a worn copy of The Millionaire Next Door. He said, "Read it, understand it, live it." That book changed everything. I realized that wealth wasn't about being lucky or born rich. It was about discipline, saving, investing wisely, living below your means. No one had ever taught me that. For the next 3 years, I lived like a ghost. I saved every penny I could. I wore the same clothes, ate the cheapest food, and walked everywhere instead of taking the subway. My coworkers thought I was crazy, but I had a vision. One day, I would open my own place. A small cafe, maybe. Something simple, honest, and mine. I kept working at Eddie's Diner, saving every dollar. I refused to waste money on anything unnecessary. No new shoes, no nights out, no fancy phones. Some nights, when the loneliness became unbearable, I would walk the streets of the city, just watching people live their lives, laughing, arguing, hustling, dreaming. I wanted all of it, the freedom, the success, the respect. Harold, the old bookstore owner, became the closest thing I had to a mentor. Every week, he gave me a new book. Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Think and Grow Rich, The Richest Man in Babylon. At first, the words were hard. I didn't understand half the concepts. But slowly, like a muscle being trained, my mind got stronger. Knowledge is like money, Harold told me once. It compounds. The more you have, the faster it grows. One evening, after closing up the diner, I was sitting outside Eddie's, counting my tip money, when a man in a business suit walked past me. He was talking loudly on the phone, complaining about needing someone to deliver sandwiches for a meeting the next day. Something sparked inside me. I stood up and walked after him. "Excuse me, sir," I called out. He turned, frowning. "What?" "I can deliver sandwiches. Early morning, cheap." He looked me up and down. "You got a car?" "No, but I can take the subway. I'll be there, promise." He hesitated, then said, "Fine. Be at 49th and Lexington, 7 a.m. sharp." That night, I barely slept. At 5 a.m., I was up. I ran to a 24-hour grocery store, bought bread, cheese, ham, and mustard with the last of my cash. I made 15 sandwiches, wrapped them in plastic, packed them in a box, and hustled to Lexington Avenue. When he saw me, he laughed. "You serious?" I nodded. He shrugged and paid me $50 on the spot. That $50 felt better than any paycheck I had ever earned. Word spread faster than I could believe. By the next week, 3 other small offices were calling me, asking for deliveries. I begged Eddie to let me use the kitchen at night. He grumbled, but agreed, for a cut of my profits. Soon, I was making $100 a day, more than I ever thought possible. I quit working regular shifts at the diner and focused fully on deliveries. At first, it was chaos. I had no car, no proper kitchen, no help. I was running through subway stations with huge boxes of sandwiches, sweating through my clothes, missing trains, getting lost. But every night, when I counted my earnings, I knew it was worth it. In 6 months, I had saved over $12,000. I found a tiny commercial kitchen space in Queens and rented it for cheap. I hired 2 guys from the old diner to help me with food prep and delivery. We weren't fancy. We didn't even have a website yet. But the offices kept calling. They didn't care that our boxes were ugly or our sandwiches basic. They cared that we showed up on time, every time, with fresh food and no excuses. One night, while I was mopping the kitchen floor, Harold came by. "You're building something real," he said, smiling. "Most people your age are out drinking or chasing girls. You're chasing something better." I didn't feel proud. I felt tired, but I also felt alive in a way I never had before. Then came the first disaster. It was a Wednesday morning. We had a huge order, 60 sandwiches, 20 salads, 5 trays of cookies, for a corporate meeting downtown. My guys didn't show up. One called in sick, the other just quit. I panicked. I had 2 hours to fulfill the order, alone. I rushed through assembling everything, spilled coffee on half the cookies, dropped a salad container, cursed more times than I can count. At 8:30 a.m., I loaded everything into an old shopping cart I had found in an alley and sprinted toward the subway station like a maniac. When I arrived, sweaty and half-crazed, the secretary looked horrified. The sandwiches were squashed. The salads were a mess. The cookies were ruined. The office manager, a tall woman with sharp eyes, marched over. "This is unacceptable," she snapped. I stammered an apology, offered to refund everything. She crossed her arms. "You're lucky I'm not charging you for the ruined meeting." That day, I lost almost every single client I had. I stumbled home, collapsed on my mattress, and cried for the first time in years. I wanted to quit. I wanted to run back home, hide, forget I ever tried. I stared at the cracked ceiling and thought about all the people who had laughed at me, all the teachers who said I'd be nothing, all the family members who had forgotten my name. Maybe they were right. But then I remembered Harold's voice. Fall down 7 times, stand up 8. I wiped my face, stood up, and grabbed a notebook. I spent the next 12 hours writing down everything I had done wrong. Disorganized supplies, no backup plan, no trained team. I made a new system, schedules, emergency contacts, quality checks. I promised myself, never again would I be so unprepared. The next morning, I went back to every single office, apologized in person, offered free samples, begged for another chance. Some said no, but a few, just a few, agreed. Slowly, painfully, the business crawled back to life. I worked harder than ever. I woke up at 4 a.m. every day, prepped the orders myself, and made deliveries even in freezing rain or burning heat. My hands were cracked from washing dishes all day. My shoes had holes from walking miles on foot. My stomach hurt often because I skipped meals to save money. But none of it mattered, because every dollar I earned meant one step closer to freedom. After the disaster, I became obsessed with improvement. I read business books late into the night, marketing, operations, leadership. I watched free lectures online about logistics and customer service. I learned how to make schedules, how to forecast supplies, how to negotiate with vendors. If someone had seen me then, a skinny, tired kid in worn-out clothes scribbling notes at a kitchen table, they would have laughed. But I wasn't chasing dreams anymore. I was building reality. 6 months later, my small business had 10 regular clients again. We specialized in simple, reliable lunch catering for small offices. No frills, no fancy branding, just good food, on time, every time. I bought my first second-hand van, an old white Ford that smelled like gasoline. I learned to drive it myself, even though I barely had the money to pay for insurance. Now, we didn't need to rely on subways. We could take bigger orders. We could reach farther offices. One day, an executive assistant from a major law firm called me. "We have an event for 300 people," she said. "Can you handle it?" I paused for half a second, my heart racing, and said, "Of course." I had no clue how I would pull it off, but I knew one thing: I would figure it out. I called every friend I had ever made. I hired 4 temporary workers. I borrowed kitchen space from a bakery owner I knew. I worked 72 hours without proper sleep, prepping sandwiches, salads, wraps, fruit trays. On the morning of the event, I personally checked every box 3 times. We delivered on time. The food looked perfect. The client was thrilled. She handed me a fat envelope full of cash and said, "Keep doing what you're doing." That event changed everything. Within 2 months, I was getting calls from bigger firms, conference organizers, corporate meetings. Money started flowing in faster. I moved the business out of the tiny Queen's kitchen into a small warehouse space near Brooklyn. I painted the walls bright white, bought second-hand stainless steel equipment, and hung a crooked clock on the wall. It wasn't pretty, but it was mine. I hired 5 full-time workers. I trained them personally. We had uniforms now. Cheap black shirts with our simple logo, Fast Bite Catering. For the first time, I allowed myself a small celebration. I bought a decent mattress. I treated my team to dinner at a diner, still not a fancy restaurant. Couldn't afford mistakes. I thought maybe, just maybe, I was getting ahead. But life wasn't done testing me. The second storm. It was January, bitter cold. We had a major client, a tech company hosting an investor event. 350 guests, huge money, biggest event yet. The night before, the warehouse heater broke. Pipes froze. Half the food supplies were ruined. I called repairmen. No one could come until next morning. I panicked. I shouted at my workers. I punched a wall and split my knuckles. But then I forced myself to stop. Think. What would a real businessman do? I divided the team, half rushed to buy new supplies, driving to every grocery store still open. The other half helped me salvage whatever we could. I kept making sandwiches until my fingers went numb from the cold. By 4 a.m., we had barely enough food ready. We loaded the van and raced across icy streets to the client's office. When we arrived, snow was falling so hard we could barely see, but we made it. The event was a success. No one knew what had happened behind the scenes. When I got home that night, I collapsed onto my new mattress, still in my freezing cold kitchen, still wearing my wet boots. I slept for 14 straight hours. The first betrayal. As the business grew, I started trusting people more, maybe too much. I promoted a worker named Jason, a guy I had hired early on, to manage scheduling and supplies. He was smart, charismatic. Clients loved him. I thought he was my friend. But one day, a client emailed me by mistake, copying me on a bill Jason had sent from a new company name. He was stealing my clients, building his own catering side hustle right under my nose. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. "You're not paying enough," he said coldly. "This is just business." I fired him on the spot. Half my team left with him. I sat alone on the warehouse floor that night, wondering if I had made a mistake trusting anyone. I almost gave up. Almost. But then I remembered something my grandfather used to say back when I was a kid. Real gold doesn't fear the fire. I hired new workers, trained them harder, built stronger contracts, watched finances like a hawk. I learned the hard way. Loyalty isn't free. You earn it, and you protect yourself at all times. The turning point. 2 years after starting with nothing, Fast Bite Catering had 15 employees. We served over 50 regular clients. Our revenue crossed $500,000 a year. I bought a second van, then a third. We moved into a bigger warehouse. We got a proper accountant, a lawyer, and a marketing consultant. I was still working 16-hour days. I still cleaned the kitchen myself sometimes, but I could feel it. We were no longer struggling to survive. We were growing. One day, standing on the loading dock watching the vans pull out for deliveries, I realized something crazy. I had built a real company. From nothing. From the cracked sidewalks and frozen nights and broken promises, I had done it. Not because I was smarter, not because I was luckier, but because I just refused to stay down. The final lesson, looking back now, older, maybe a little wiser, I see it clearly. The real victory wasn't the money. It wasn't the offices or the vans or the client lists. The real victory was becoming the kind of person who didn't quit. Every time I got knocked down, life was asking me one question. How bad do you want it? And every time I answered, more than anything. That's why I made it. That's why I'm still here. And if you're reading this, sitting somewhere, broke, scared, lost, wondering if you have what it takes to change your life, let me tell you, you do, but only if you want it enough.